your scripture. And I'm going to do it different. I'm going to not write notes on the board. I want you to follow along in your book, and I'm just kind of going over the book, and I want you to have your notebook out. We're going to try to do this more the way you would do it from a lecture than from notes on the board. So, to your review, personality. Personality is a relatively stable pattern of psychiatric characteristics or traits, who you are and what kind of person you are. Traits are enduring and consistent patterns of thoughts, feelings, attitudes, and behaviors. Personality theories have been around since forever. We talked about astrology, how your personality is determined by the stars you're born under, what time of year you're born. Hippocrates had the 4 temperaments associated with different body fluids or humors, the sanguine, choleric, phlegmatic, and melancholy. Some of you sent me your results from that. Remember, personality assessments are participation grades. Talked about Freud, the first comprehensive theory of personality, still the most influential. 3 interacting levels of awareness. Conscious, you're actively aware. Preconscious, not actively aware, but you can bring it back to the front, like if we try to remember what we did for Christmas or something. And then unconscious, the things you're not aware of. According to Freud, those are the driving force of your personality. His theory is called psychodynamic, psychosexual, or psychoanalytic. All mental activity is driven by 2 competing universal inborn life forces or instincts, sexual force and death force. So that's eros or thanatos. The 3 personality parts in Freud's theory are the id, the instinctive unconscious, seeks out immediate gratification, operates on the pleasure principle. This is, I do what I want. The ego, your sense of self, public and private expression or personality, relational, how you want people to see you. This works on the reality principle, I do my best. And then you have the superego, which is basically the judge or supervisor or your conscience, and operates on the idealistic principle, I do what I ought. In the book, you see where they talk about the ways that the ego defends itself. Those are on page 144. Denial, rationalization, and everybody read one of those the other day in class. So then, from there, talked about how you had to get through the psychosexual stages, according to Freud, too, or you'd get stuck at that stage of development. Okay? Today I sent you several different personality assessments, including this really creepy one. And I took almost all of them. That's my disclaimer. So if something comes up weird, tell your parents I took almost all of them, but I got really tired of taking personality assessments. So in our text, we go from Freud to Carl Jung. And Carl Jung was a student of Freud's, also Austrian. But he was raised I think he was Austrian. I think so. Freud was, I don't know. He was raised in a Christian home, but he quickly adopted his mentor's atheistic, almost sometimes satanic beliefs. They called him Neo-Freudian. Neo, when you have the prefix neo, it means new. So he's like a new version of Freud. Like Freud, he believed that unlike Freud, he did believe that religion had benefit, that the myths helped us, because he believed in archetypes. He believed that there were universal truths for everybody, an archetype, the pinnacle of that thing. On page 146, you see information about the relationship between Freud and Jung, and by the time they were old, they were enemies. Jungian theory is hard to explain in a short period, in a short class. Some of you might have read my paper, my graduate paper about Jungian archetypal dream analysis. Carl Jung was a big believer that dreams were an indicator of what was going on in someone's psyche. His practice of psychology, his theory is called analytic psychology as opposed to psychoanalytic. So it's like a flip on the thing, right? He believed also that we had 3 levels. Our conscious level, which is sort of Freud's equivalent to the ego. a personal unconscious, which is like your underneath the surface, you're kind of like your id. But then he believed in a collective unconscious, that we all had universal concepts that we believed in. There's across every culture, there's a concept of God. Across every culture, there's a concept of family. Across every culture, there's a concept of poverty, of destruction, of abuse. These are cross-cultural concepts. So he called them the collective unconscious, universal. Everybody experiences these things at some level, and how you experience it creates within you a complex. So this is not in your book. I'm going to say it twice. Complexes are core patterns of emotions, memories, perceptions, and wishes in the personal unconscious, organized around a common theme. Core patterns of emotions, memories, perceptions, and wishes in the personal unconscious, organized around a common theme. So you've heard it said, some people say of doctors that they have a God complex because they think they can do anything. Or somebody might have a martyr complex, somebody that always has to act like they're, like they're victimized. An inferiority complex, a guilt complex, any notion that would be taken to the extreme, okay? Again, like I said, Jung was a big believer that dreams were an excellent indication of what was going on in someone's psyche. And he always would look for the archetype in the dream, which the universal symbols in the dream. So like if you read my paper, it was about dreams in the Judeo-Christian tradition, and I used some from the Bible, like the dreams of Joseph, and then I used some that I had collected. And in these dreams, there's always this image of God. This is cross-cultural. Of course, we believe ours is truth, but this is cross-cultural. He also believed that people have a persona. The persona, the closest thing to the persona in Freud's theory is the ego. So it's like a mask, the part of ourselves that we allow others to see. He also believed we had a shadow in our personality, which is sort of like the id. It's the part of ourselves we do not want others to see. And then he mentions in the text death, archetypes of death, and anima and animus, which are female and male archetypes. Jungian theory is the basis for the Myers-Briggs test and the balance of three parts: the introvert versus the extrovert, the thinking versus the feeling, and the sensing versus intuition. So he didn't develop Myers-Briggs. Myers and Briggs developed Myers-Briggs, but they were Jungian psychologists, and they developed it based on his theory of personality. The last paragraph on page 146 talks about a really interesting aspect of Jung's personality and how he communicated with spirit guides. Read it in the text. It's not going to be on the quiz. From Jung, the text talks about Alfred Adler. Alfred Adler was the first one to come up with the concept of individual psychology. The driving force is striving for perfection in our early relationships. So he believed that the family was the most integral part of your life, and your placement in the family was a determining factor in your character and your personality. Let me show you. So Alfred Adler believed in birth order psychology. There is a Christian psychologist by the name of Kevin Leman who also, to this day, contemporarily, uses birth order psychology and talks a lot about birth order affecting your personality. It's Leman, Leman. He has a Christian radio show. But you can read here, and I'll send this to you, and you might identify yourself there. Okay? He says that in a family, you're always trying to compensate for feelings of inferiority. So the oldest is trying to compensate for the fact that they've been dethroned by the second. Or the baby's trying to compensate for the fact that everybody's bigger than them. Or the first girl is kind of compensate for the fact that she's not a boy and her father likes boys better, whatever. Everybody's always trying to compensate in his theory. He coined the term inferiority complex. It is a paralyzing feeling of inferiority. He also coined the term sibling rivalry, and that is competition between siblings for parental approval. According to Adler, personality is formed by the age of 6. So Freud, Jung, Adler, other theorists believed in a deep unconscious, deep psyche. You are who you are because of things that are going on deep inside of you that you may or may not be aware of, that you might have repressed, that might have happened in your childhood, traumatic experiences. Behaviorist theories, they don't believe that. They believe that everything about who you are is learned. So this goes back to like Pavlov and Skinner and Watson, right? All personality is learned behavior. Whatever was modeled and reinforced will be exhibited. Whatever is modeled or reinforced will be exhibited. So if you're in a family of people who are boisterous and loud and confident and outgoing, you're very unlikely to be reserved and introverted and quiet, according to behaviorist theory. And conversely, if you're from a family of book readers and, shy, quiet people, you're unlikely to be an extraordinarily extroverted person. You remember Skinner, Watson, Pavlov. This was the operant conditioning. We learned all this in learning. Okay. Then the text talks about trait theories. Trait theories focus on the ways individual personalities differ. Instead of how people are the same, it's how they differ. A trait, again, is a mental characteristic that makes up your personality. So shyness is a trait. Aggressiveness is a trait. Being outgoing is a trait. Personality types are a collection of your traits. So if you take somebody who's loud and outgoing and friendly and warm and happy-go-lucky, that's a particular personality collection, right? Gordon Allport was taught the first college-level personality course in the United States, and he collected personality traits. He said he believed that he found 18,000 words in the English language to define the human personality. And he talks about cardinal traits, which your cardinal trait would be the most prominent trait about you. I sent you a test to find out what your cardinal trait would be. Mine was assertiveness. Shocking, huh? And then you have central traits, 5 to 10 central traits, major characteristics about you that would probably support your cardinal trait. So if your cardinal trait is assertiveness, one of your central traits would probably be boldness, confidence, being talkative, something like that. And then thirdly, you have secondary traits. And those appear only in certain situations. So those are going to show up, like say you take somebody whose cardinal trait is that they're steadfast, that they're generally reserved and not super easily upset. Here's an example. So then it might be that for whatever reason, standing in line or being in traffic makes this person who's normally steadfast really irritated. So that would be a secondary trait. It only happens when I'm in line at the grocery store. It only happens like there are people that are never angry that get road rage, right? So this is what that looks like. Those are Allport's trait theory. And like I said, watch your email. I sent you a test for your cardinal trait. Any of these theories you can find more information on and do for further study, more tests. But the tests that I'm sending you, when you do them, send me your results. Some of you have sent me your results. And those would be part of your partition grade. But for further study, I would encourage you to dig deeper into the various theories themselves. The next one the text talks about is Hans Eysenck. Hans Eysenck, he talked about temperaments. Remember, in developmental, we learned about temperaments, like how a baby has a particular temperament. You see it from the time they're very little, if they're going to be withdrawn or outgoing, or how they're going to respond to people. He believed that your temperaments were either introversion, extroversion, neuroticism, emotional stability, and psychoticism. I sent you a test about that too. And his theory is very interesting. In fact, I was surprised when I saw that I didn't actually remember learning much about Eysenck when I was in school. And I guess when I taught the boys, I didn't notice either. But you can read on page 148 about what he means when he talks about introversion, extroversion, neuroticism versus emotional stability, and psychoticism. So when you take that test, I would like to see what your results were. And maybe we can talk about them in the Zoom call. And then we always seem to come back to Raymond Cattell. You remember Cattell was the flexible versus fixed memory guy, crystallized memory guy. And he believed in 16 primary traits. He has an evaluation called 16PF. And those 16 traits are listed on page 148. Warmth, reasoning, emotional stability, dominance, liveliness, rule consciousness, social boldness, sensitivity, vigilance, abstractedness, privateness, apprehension, openness to change, self-reliance, perfectionism, and tension. I just did this one, and the results were very interesting for me. All of the trait theories get boiled down to what they call the Big Five. And you'll find lots of quizzes and tests and assessments online that give you a chance to test on the Big Five. I sent you one. So the Big Five come down to extroverted versus introverted, agreeable versus antagonistic, conscientious versus negligent, emotionally stable versus emotionally unstable, and open versus closed. Open versus closed would be, are you receptive to new ideas and new input, adventurous, etc., and closed would be no, you're not, right? So I sent you a Big Five test as well. Okay. I'm going to send you those two things that I had on this screen. And you have plenty of notes. You can just take your book and make notes from your book, like some of you already do. And then after the faculty meeting tomorrow, I'll let you know if we're going to do a Zoom class on Monday or just Thursday. In the meantime, keep reading. I expect to see some further study. I expect to hear from you. I expect some interaction, even though we didn't have class today. Back and forth, and I want to hear how you're doing on these assessments. Okay? Talk to you later. Have a good weekend.